Students, in this video, I'm going to talk about the origins of the Age of Discovery, this amazing phenomenon in which we see Europeans spreading out across the world, discovering and engaging with cultures and places that many of them never even knew existed before. And this is going to bring them into contact with the American continent, make European peoples a hugely important part of American history. And so we look at initially in this video, why does this phenomenon happen? Why is it that Europeans are the great explorers and the great discoverers rather than other cultures, rather than people from a different place? The answer, or the origins of the answer, lies in medieval European culture. Something that's rarely acknowledged, but it is absolutely true that medieval Europeans were fascinated with foreign people and foreign cultures. And in the mid-13th century, right around the time that we saw in the last video that the Mississippian culture was starting to decline and was starting to fragment, we find that European peoples have new access to these different cultures and different places through the Eastern Mediterranean, through the Mongol Empire. There's this new Mongol Empire that connects China with the Middle East, and that Europeans are able to travel through this empire. Sometimes just to explore, sometimes to preach Christianity, sometimes as traders. And that exposure to this empire and to discovering the interior of Asia only increases European fascination with foreign cultures. But just as European interest in exploring outside the Mediterranean, outside of Europe, is starting to peak, this access to other cultures and other places gets shut down in the Eastern Mediterranean. It gets shut down because about a century later, you have the pandemic of the Black Death. Millions of people die, the Ottoman Empire disappears, and is replaced about a century later by the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, which is a Muslim empire, is opposed to, or at least very uneasy about, Christian traders and Christian missionaries operating in its lands. And so this access to Asia that the Mongol Empire provided is taken away from Europeans. And so this European energy to discover and to encounter and explore foreign lands, foreign societies, finds its focus instead in the Western Mediterranean, in the kingdoms of Spain and Portugal. Medieval Spain and Portugal have fascinating histories because of the unique interaction between Islamic and Christian cultures in these areas. And without going into the history, by the late 15th century, Christian kingdoms are successfully restoring all of the Spanish peninsula to Christian rule, either the Kingdom of Spain or the Kingdom of Portugal, and they're driving out or defeating the Muslim rulers in the south of the peninsula. And so we start to find that the Spanish and the Portuguese now have new resources and new energy to expand their influence and to explore outside of Europe. And so we see this first with the Portuguese. At first, they attempt to establish an empire by conquering territories in Africa. But they find that the kingdoms that they encounter in Africa are too powerful. Again, this is something that often gets overlooked, but is absolutely true and very important. The kingdoms that the Portuguese encounter in Africa are very sophisticated and very powerful and impossible for the Portuguese to conquer. And so in place of conquering territory in Africa, the Portuguese will establish an empire based on trade. Trading relations with African kingdoms down the coast of Africa and into the Indian Ocean. And the Portuguese are very much ahead of the game. And so it's for this reason that the Spanish kingdom, which has just completed its own restoration of what the Spanish king and queen, Ferdinand and Isabel, saw as their historic territories in 1492, that they are willing to take a chance on this explorer Christopher Columbus and his proposal to undercut Portuguese explorers by reaching Asia by sailing to the west. Spain is trying to catch up with Portugal, and so they're willing to overlook some of the more or some of the less plausible aspects of Columbus's theory. The reason that other kingdoms in Europe were unwilling to fund Columbus was not that they thought the earth was flat. This is a myth. All educated people in Europe at the time knew that the world was round, and they had a better idea of its size than Columbus did. Columbus suggested that it was only about 2,500 miles from Europe to Asia if you sailed west. Most educated people in Europe at the time knew that it was much closer to what we know today, that it's about 11,000 miles. And so they knew that Columbus would run out of resources in the middle of the ocean. It wasn't that they were bigoted towards Columbus or to new ideas in some way. They were the ones who were actually working better from the data that was available to them at the time. But as I say, Ferdinand and Isabel are willing to take a chance on Columbus, and we know that Columbus discovers the islands of the Bahamas on his first voyage. He sees these islands. He explores these islands and he returns to Spain convinced that he has reached Asia. Columbus will make 3 further voyages in his life, always convinced that he had reached Asia. In one of these voyages, he is taken back to Spain as a prisoner in chains because he was accused of mistreating Native American peoples. In the end, he's exonerated, but it shows how seriously the Spanish king and queen took treating Native American peoples with respect and with dignity, while they nevertheless wished to rule over them. In his final voyage, Columbus encounters or discovers a giant river estuary. And this is the sign that he's no longer just exploring islands, but that he's reached a continental landmass, that he's reached the continent of the Americas.